At first glance, these three pendants might not look like much. This is one of the most unsettling things I have come across. This is a very, very sensitive topic. I've had those for months. I've been unsure how to make a video, and I know what a lot of you are gonna be thinking with this, but the fact is, they're in front of me. I'm on here to educate. I need to educate. How many of you are familiar with Canada's genocide? Because that's what these are from. Genocide can take many forms. It isn't just the extermination of life. It can also be a cultural genocide, the extinguishing of a culture or a people's heritage. And that's exactly what happened in Canada. Starting in the 1800s, the Canadian government and various church organizations sought to suppress the Indigenous peoples living in Canada and assimilate them into Euro-Canadian society through acts of cultural suppression. This included extinguishing their language, their culture, their heritage. And then in 1876, the Canadian government passed the Indian Act. This is bureaucratic genocide. Some key points within this act were banned governments, land management, defining who was an Indian through bloodline, cultural suppression such as banning sun dances, and re-education. This is where the genocide really comes into play. Indigenous First Nation peoples' families were ripped apart. Children were taken from their homes and sent to re-education camps to stomp out their culture, their language, their identity, everything about them. Now, starting in the very late 1800s, we got the residential school system. It was run by the Canadian government in cahoots with various churches. Now, these schools are where kids who were ripped apart from their families were sent to be re-educated, but what ended up happening to them was horrific. Not only were children forbidden from speaking their native languages or doing anything that had to do with their culture whatsoever, but they were subject to incredible physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. The long-lasting negative impact of those who attended these schools, not just the individuals, entire communities were destroyed because of the damage this did. Now, although this isn't something like Auschwitz where there's executions taking place, they have found mass graves. At least 4,000 kids have died that they know about. They didn't even keep records. They would just treat these kids so horrendously, abuse them so savagely, they would die, and then they would just get buried in a mass grave, and nobody was accountable. Now, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has led to some public apologies, the reintroduction of some language and culture that was stomped out. The Canadian government has also committed to investing in Indigenous infrastructure, education, and healthcare as an act of apology. But the fact is, not enough people were held accountable, and these schools lasted until the end of the 20th century. In fact, as recently as June 2021, another mass grave was found with 182 bodies in it. Some of these schools were more horrific than others. St. Joseph's, there are survivor stories out there that are really, really disturbing. I didn't have to look hard to find this Guardian article, a survivor of St. Joseph's. He called it a smorgasbord for pedophiles and rapists who preyed on and terrorized Native children. Now, I do need to be geographically specific. The St. Joseph School was located in South Dakota, but that's because the United States also participated in this horrible program. It's still part of the same genocide. I will say this is not a happy topic. I don't like talking about this, but education is really important. And these are not for sale. I'm donating these to a museum.